right, welcome to Legacies, everyone. I'm joined this week by Deepak Anand. But first, Legacies is powered by Aveo, leaders in sustainable vape hardware. Deepak, it's so good to see you, man. How you doing?
Likewise, Tom. Thanks for having me.
When we finally got a chance to connect, like I want to get you on the pod. It had been years, I think,
Yeah.
since we see you're off over in Malta doing stuff and consulting over here and there. You're always busy.
Busy indeed and lots of traveling.
Yeah. So for our audience, I want to go into your background a little bit and what led you to. You know what I didn't realize when I was pulling up bio. I like to do the research that I do. I didn't realize that you had helped with KPU's curriculum, cannabis studies.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. When Purcell dragged me in to instruct, I'm like, yeah, okay. And it wasn't the money. It was more of Purcell and his sweet charm and pulling me in, right? And Remillard was there at the time. But no, I didn't realize that you were involved with the forming of that curriculum.
Yeah, Tom. I mean, it was even way before that. So, before Purcell actually even came on, I kind of pitched KPU and the previous management team there that they should do something in cannabis, right? And they were quite skeptical, but eventually it was great that they, got to doing it. It was the first kind of, university level program globally, right?
Yeah.
So it was great to be able to have that. But yeah, I sort of, set it up and kind of did the first iteration, and then, you guys came along, so it was great.
Many iterations. I remember going out when they decided to add the QA component to it. Wow, that was a weird weekend. I'll tell you, if you've ever sat in a room, and I'm sure you have, if anyone has, sit in the room with 20 different QA professionals from across the industry, they think different. Like,
oh yeah.
way different. And I'm like, oh my God, what did I get myself into? Anyways, let's back up. Early days, man. I mean, you started, if anyone's an OG in this industry, it's you. Like you started, what, 2014, 15 originally, started looking at what was going on. ACNPR was forming up before we were even thinking Cannabis Act. Trudeau government was going to come in. Walk us through that. What were you doing?
Yeah, so it was like 2013, 2014, it was still very much MMAR days. The MMAR was being challenged at the time, by Kirk Tusaw and John Conroy and, all those, the different real OGs in the industry from the Vancouver area. And I was just sort of, watching what was going on. I sort of, came from the pharmaceutical industry and, brought that regulatory compliance lens, and, it was very new at the time. So, that's sort of, what got me interested and really setting up sort of the first industry association. That's how I got started, Canadian National Medical Marijuana Association, mouthful, but definitely started there. And, that's what sort of got me into it, Tom, and it was a lot of learning, and still is a lot of learning.
It's still, it's funny how, so I was on, God, it was 11 o'clock this morning, and I'm talking to the MCA in St. Vincent, and Terrell Mapp, who's the COO, and I remember those boots on the ground days helping them with their regulatory framework and things. Man, I'm still learning so much.
That's it.
It's just every day there's something else. And I had even posted this morning, we've got this weird departure from medical, but let's not forget, that's where it started. It started there, even back to the days of the Compassion Club. I mean, you're in BC, so you were close to this and saw what was happening. I was an MMAR guy. I saw the change in regulations coming. I'll let people draw their own conclusions when it comes to MMAR, but everyone that understands it knows. So you moved on from that. Eventually, you joined CCI, correct? Were you a founding member, or you had worked with the team early on?
Yeah, I sort of, I knew Brian Wagner, kind of who really founded CCI at the time, NHP Compliance, and, really sort of came together with him still at NHP to be able to develop and build Cannabis Compliance Inc. And so, that's how I sort of, got my feet wet really full time on the regulatory compliance consulting side of things.
What did you find? I always like to reminisce a little bit in those days. Like what was the biggest eye-opening experience to the industry in those days at CCI anyways? Because that's when things were really starting to take off. I mean, Aurora's coming on, Organogram's coming on, Apria is coming on. What was at least one experience where you're like, holy shit, we're in it now?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, Tom, it was the level of like the number of applications that were coming
Oh yeah.
inbound, right? Like something we did not expect, right? There was
Mhm.
the original 13 LPs, if you remember back in
Yeah.
the day, and that's
Yeah.
the only group that had their licenses, and there was like 200 applicants in the queue, right? And it just
Yeah.
they kept coming, right? There was no sort of signs of stopping or slowing down. And for like me and us, that was the holy shit moment, right? It was like, oh my God, like this is now mainstream. There's a lot of money coming into this industry. There's a lot of people behind it. And really, there was a lot of onus on us to be able to get applications. Like when we started CCI, we'd worked on many applications, but
Mhm.
nothing was getting approved. If you remember Health Canada back in
Oh
the day, it
yeah.
was like a black box, right?
Yeah.
So for us, that was the holy smokes moment.
Yeah, and I still I still remember those days, right? Because we'd have these celebrations, and obviously, so for anyone that's not familiar with those early days, CCI and other consulting companies would work with would-be LPs or those that are seeking application and licensing. Ample Organics was a compliance software, so we had to come into the mix at some point. You had different choices; it didn't have to be Ample, but John in his world was leading that charge. You could use Excel if you wanted. I mean, you'd be crazy to be putting out spreadsheets, but I still remember all those original blueprints and layouts coming through, and CCI stamped at the bottom, and then you see Hyde and Associates and all these guys. But you're right, it was a black box because everything was going in and there was no information coming out in those days. But on those Fridays, right, it
Yeah.
was another license, another license, another license. Then it just picked up. Obviously, it's slowed down now. And I mean, David Brown does a great job of posting, and keeping up with here's a new license.
Yeah.
I see a new license and I'm like, were you around? Have you been do you know do you know what's going on in this industry? Like what do you know what you're getting into? Anyway, so fast forward a little bit because materia forms up. Did you move to Malta? Were you
I
living in
didn't
Malta for a
I didn't
while?
personally move myself, but I had a
Okay.
great team. Nick Pateris, was at left, and he really wanted to move to Europe, and so I headed under to him to be able to go set
Hmm.
up on the ground in the UK. And then we had a number of people, even Greg from Ample back in the
Yeah,
day,
yeah.
so got him to spend a bunch of time in Malta. Yeah, I didn't physically move myself, but definitely was involved on that side
Yeah,
of
yeah.
things.
It's
Yeah,
boots on ground though a few times anyways. Malta's really I've been to Malta.
yeah,
Very strange. It's beautiful, but obviously all the bombing that happened way back,
yeah.
everything looks the same color with the same limestone buildings now. But
That's it.
what was popping off there? Was that kind of a jumping point for Europe? We're going to get into the international consulting and what's going on in the different markets and regions, but I'm curious because I don't know if we've ever had a chance to discuss this. Like, what was going on? Why Malta? Like, what? Like, it's not the epicenter of cannabis in the world, but maybe is that what you guys saw? Like.
Yeah, I mean, Tom, it was really one of the first jurisdictions in Europe to be able to embrace sort of the industry, right? And be able to say, all right, like, we are going to look at, regulating cannabis. It wasn't, back in the day, it was definitely not about legalizing cannabis where the discussion seems to have gone.
Mhm.
Now, it was very much around, like, how do we embrace medical cannabis and how do we sort of, get involved in the pharmaceutical medical aspect of things? What most people don't appreciate is Malta has a huge background in the pharmaceutical side of things, right?
Mm.
Where they were this tiny island way before the European Union had even set up, and it's where majority of the drug companies had forgotten or just didn't bother registering patents and
Oh,
trademarks. So
wow.
lo and behold, when they became part of the European Union, all of a sudden a lot of the generic companies, moved their bases there because it was this jurisdiction within the EU that had no patent restrictions. So a
Wow.
lot of generic drug companies actually ended up setting up in Malta, and that's how there was a lot of that QA regulatory infrastructure that got built around that.
Cool,
And
cool.
that's really what I saw as being the opportunity. And it was early days, of course, but that was really the interest about Malta.
Yeah. Wow. And obviously if they're set up for that, then the governments are probably a little easier to work with.
Oh, exactly, right? I mean, and the one thing Malta is also known for is regulating newer industry, whether it be online gambling, the poker side of things. PartyPoker.net actually, was based there. They have their servers there.
Let's
So
plug
they
them
have
again.
like
Maybe we'll
this
get a
history.
sponsorship.
Yeah, exactly. They have this history of like, regulating kind of, companies and industries
Right,
that were
right.
newer.
Hmm.
And being part of Europe offers a number of advantages.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so you do some work in Canada, you set eyes on Europe. Obviously, Australia was coming online, CARICOM, which I've
Yes.
done some work in. I still,
Yeah.
as small as that market is, it's probably just my affinity for the Caribbean. Like,
Yeah.
I want to see that market, but also I think for at least CARICOM and you know, they really took to heart the traditional farmers or the indigenous farmers, understanding, you know, what does an amnesty program look like?
Yes.
How do we include all that raw tonnage of
Yeah.
cannabis into our system? So I still have this, you know, this love for that region. Obviously, you have worked. I've worked with the Australians a little bit.
Yeah.
What what? There's so many cool directions I want to go with this. But first, I guess, like what country or territory outside of Canada and outside of Malta when that was forming, which one got you the most excited?
Yeah, I'd definitely say Australia. I think that at the time Australia was bubbling up. They had what the UK currently has, a very restrictive prescribing regime for medical cannabis, a huge departure from where it is today. But it was the first country that was really bubbling up, right? That
Right.
actually said, okay, we're gonna, at least legalize medical, right? Because again, the conversation at that time was all medical. Nobody was
Yeah.
talking about recreational legalization, right? So it was all very medical focused. But Australia was probably the country that had the biggest potential and certainly
Hmm.
saw the greatest uptick in terms of, prescribing. And then as a result of that, importation coming in from a variety of different countries, right? And we
Yeah.
saw Tilray at the time
Yep.
be the first EUGMP company to get EUGMP certification, right?
Hmm.
They were the first ones to be able to get their, I think it was Polish certification at the Nanaimo facility. And
Okay.
that really opened my eyes to be like, all right, like there is a much broader picture out there on the global landscape, and that's sort of what got it started.
Yeah.
But Australia was definitely booming at that time.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know, one thing I've never drawn a conclusion to was because, you know, again, 2017, 18, we're talking GMP and GACP or GAP, right? Depending
Yeah.
where you're at. Who really moved the needle on EU GMP? When did that become, if you're not EU GMP, you're not operating in Europe, period. But about when did that start to happen? Because as we know, that takes an awful lot of work to get that certification.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, I would say it was definitely Tilray that ended up getting that certification first.
Mhm.
They ended up really leading the pack. So it was them. That was the sort of,
And
go-to moment.
was that Australia's requirement? You had to be EU GMP?
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct. Yeah. It was
Okay.
2021 and it was Portugal, not Poland, where they ended up getting
Ah,
it from.
okay.
So yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So Australia, and I love the regions that still support medical first. I ask this of all my guests that I can, especially ones that understand the background.
Yeah.
Did Canada depart from medical? And I know that there's still a medical. Listen, I know we still have a medical system. I know we do,
Yeah.
but did we move too quickly to rec? I'm curious. I like to get everyone's feedback. I sit in the middle. I still feel that emphasis should be on medical. There's still a very strong need for that in that platform. I'm worried that one day the Health Canada just goes, you've got enough dispensaries, you've got
Uh-huh.
enough licensed producers and processors. We don't need all the onerous red tape and paperwork for medical anymore. So, question, did we move or depart from medical too quick or move into recreational too fast in Canada?
I think that's an interesting question, Tom. I think that if you look from a public policy lens, it was great to have legalized cannabis for people that wanted access to it, right? So I don't think that we necessarily risked medical for recreational. I think it's great that we were able to have a fully legal recreational market, and we still remain the only G7 country to have fully legalized cannabis at a
Mhm.
federal level and have access, right? It's not like Germany where it's sort of quasi legal, you can grow it, but you can't sell it.
Yeah.
We've got a fully robust, fleshed out legal program. And I think that's great. I do think that medical cannabis patients in the interim have suffered. And I think that's a bit of your point, right? I think
Yeah.
that did recreational legalization come on the backs of medical cannabis patients? Yes. Have we done a bit of a disservice to medical cannabis patients? Yes. Right. I think that in this rush towards legalization, we've forgotten a bit about medical cannabis patients. But come full circle now, at least what I'm seeing from a couple of clients, you're seeing some bigger companies really, really pivot back and focus on medical. In some cases, pivot back. In some cases, only enter the industry from a medical platform, right? You look at Canopy, you look at Aurora, they have very dedicated kind of medical platforms now. Aurora certainly has one of the biggest patient platforms in the industry.
Yeah.
And they very much focused on that, right? They've got a variety of different product forms that people can access from a medical perspective. And then you're seeing new companies come into the sector, right? I recently saw a CBD lozenge called Luo that's now available. Wow. And, the company that manufactures that's the first product that they've manufactured. So you're seeing a lot of sophisticated companies now look at the medical cannabis sphere. And I think we will see more of that as we go along. In cannabis, I see there's three areas. There's the medical pharmaceutical, there's the wellness segment, and then there's the recreational segment, right? And I think that wellness is a bit decoupled from recreational, because wellness could also mean medical, right? Over the counter, that sort of stuff. So, we are seeing a bit more focus on medical, a bit later, of course, and patients have suffered through this process. But it's not the end all, right? I think I'm still very proud that we remain the only G7 country to have federally fully legalized cannabis.
That's a great point. I haven't really looked at it that way. And then now you've just opened up. So I will get to international, I promise. But now there's, I'm thinking, with that resurgence into, and I wouldn't say resurgence yet. I think we're right at the cusp of it, where you've got, and you're closer to it. You work with a ton of different customers and clients on this side. But I feel like some of the almost all the innovation that we've seen in product, look at MetaPharm Labs and, the company that you've just spoke of, and Aurora's done what they can. But that's where the innovation seems to happen, right? Is on that medical side. I think Dr. Jacqueline Shan and some of these individuals, they're putting a ton of research in, like not a lot of products yet, but tons of research. And when they hit, they're going to hit. But let's demystify wellness for 1 second.
Sure.
I feel that, I talk about this quite a bit, but in the world of cannabis consumers, I feel that we entered with, okay, you've already got an existing customer base, right? It's not like we're creating a new market. If I think to my old marketing days, how can we take this product and iterate on it just a bit so we can unlock a new market segment or customer segment? In cannabis, you've got your core consumer group, right?
Yes.
Maybe they were legacy consumers. Well, they all were at one point in time, but they, eyes open, they go, hey, this is accessible now. I can go to my dispensary. Great. You got ones that still sat on, no, the edibles, they're just not there. I like my edibles. But in the wellness category, I see an opportunity to unlock a larger segment. And those ones being athletes, aging demographic, the naysayers, the ones that were, Trudeau, I don't like this idea. I don't know why you're going to legalize cannabis, because I think David had posted not long ago, it was, in comparison, alcohol is 75% supported by the population, whereas cannabis is like 25%. Does wellness help unlock or increase that alignment with cannabis potentially?
Well, absolutely, right, Tom? I think if you look at it, what's happened in this country post-legalization is, you've got THC and you've got a THC consumer that is basically wanting, the highest THC for the lowest price. We certainly saw
Can't
that
blame
for quite some time. Can't blame him. Certainly that's what they're after. But unfortunately, along with that segment, we've also sent people like my mom or, people in that age demographic that perhaps want to understand a bit more about CBD, about CBN, about CBG. They're not wanting this to just get high. Like they want to speak to someone about how CBD can help them sleep and how it may be able to help with anxiety. And, what does this do with drug interactions? Unfortunately, we're sending these people to the same recreational store that the high THC consumers are going to, right? And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But I think it would really help if they could go to where they go currently, which is, Shoppers Drug Mart or, the pharmacy stores, right? I think it would help if we could place products that are lower risk. And we know over all these years, CBD is relatively a low risk product at a decent potency. And it would be nice if you had pharmacists that were educated in that. It would be nice if you could have a natural health product with CBD that people could pick up off the shelf. There's a whole other consumer segment that is out there. And that's what I define as like the wellness category. It's people that want these non-THC, low THC products and be able to access them and get some more information. So
Yeah.
there's that whole subset that still, in my opinion, remains underserved. And you are seeing companies, and particularly big CPG, sophisticated companies, really hone in on that.
Yeah.
Without giving away too much. That's something that I see coming, and I am working with some clients in that
That's the
space.
big unlock, right? Like this when
That's it.
because when we're talking, again, the core consumer, they exist.
Yeah.
The generations are, coming up in age and they're maybe experimenting and alcohol's over here now and functional drinks or beverages, but cannabis, but I see that's the big unlock. And again, it's when you demystify it and uncouple it from, okay, you've got wellness, you've got medical, you've got rec. Man, it's pretty interesting. And it's going to be really interesting over the next couple of years, especially, I think. And you would know, again, lips are sealed, but you're working with individuals. Okay, let's get into your clients a little bit and not necessarily the specifics on them, but you work with and have consulted with government and customers or clients looking to, either expand from Canada to other regions of the world, or they're net new in those regions. How does that come about? How do they find Deepak is what I want to know. I know you've been on the world stage of cannabis and you've spoken at a ton of events. So obviously that helps. I'm sure podcasts help a little bit.
Yeah.
But outside of that, where are they coming from? And one question, how many do you turn away? It'd be the next one.
Yeah, you've only got so many hours in the day, right? So, I mean, really, Tom, I think it's, over the years, through some thought leadership, through speaking at events, through just showing up, I
Mhm.
think is really where a lot of leads come in from, right? I think I do like to research the topics that I'm speaking to and try and, inform and educate myself. And I think through that learning, if I'm able to share some further information, I think that's where people reach out to me from. They heard me on a podcast or have heard, a webinar and they've liked some insights, then they want to double click on that. That's sort of where they have reached out to me from in the
Mhm.
past, right? And I think that's really the cool thing about Canada is, we are operating in this federally legal space and again, the first G7 country and the only G7 country to have done that. There is a lot of value that comes along with that, right? I think
Yeah.
people always like to diss what Canada has done and the mistakes that have been
Yeah.
made, and it's certainly warranted. And there's been some bad actors and all of that, which I totally get. But then there was this whole positive side of things where, when it comes to product innovation, like you were just speaking to, we are the world leaders, right?
Mhm.
If you want a GMP gummy, we're one of two countries in the world that can put out a quality product, right? And the only country that has a real relevance to quality. I think that's one of the biggest things that I find when I'm overseas or when I'm representing clients overseas. It's the Canadian quality of cannabis is second to none, right? Like if
Mhm.
you ask anyone on the global stage who has the best cannabis in terms of the quality perspective, it's us.
Yeah.
It's not California yet, right? Yet, right? They haven't
Mhm.
managed to export besides the genetics. They aren't able to export flower
Right.
or
Right.
products, right? So it's really us, and we're leading the world on that. So that's the real cool part about legalization is it's allowed us to be thought leaders
Mhm.
on the international stage.
Yeah. Well, the research, the innovation, the influx of capital in the early days. Is there capital being deployed now? Is it into Canada?
Yeah, I mean, so if you look again, I'll speak to what is already public. If you look at British American Tobacco and
Mhm.
the stuff they're putting into Organogram, that's still money, new funds, net new funds being coming in and invested, right? So it's none of that retail investor hype where people are putting money into a stock. Some of that is happening. You saw in the last weeks
Mhm.
post US rescheduling, some Canadian
Yeah.
stocks got a bump, but by and large, you are seeing some very sophisticated money now enter the sector, right? It's strategic. It's the CPG companies, it's some of the tobacco companies. They are starting to look at it. And soon, even big alcohol, I know they've had their foray with Canopy and Constellation. But if you look at US stats, I think this week I was looking that alcohol consumption in the US is down,
Yeah.
right? Big
Yeah.
time. So I
Yeah.
think these companies are like, our existing business is dying. How
Mhm.
do we pivot and how do we look at cannabis, right? So that's where a lot of that influx of capital is coming from, Tom.
Yeah, and it makes sense. I mean, they're smart investment dollars, right? They're playing a longer game. I've so many, Seth and Mitchell Osak and these guys,
Yeah.
like you all work closely with these companies, and it's a long game. Like they're not
That's
short
it.
on cash. So,
That's it.
right.
Yeah. But there's something to be said, Tom, right? Like, I mean, these companies coming in, I think they really raise the standard of the industry, right? I think at least the clients that I'm speaking to, they're like, Deepak, we want to understand this from a risk perspective, right? We've seen, what happens when you put out, products that are untested or unsafe, right? And how do we bring that safety element? How do we bring our experience, whether it be alcohol, tobacco, CPG, when it comes to distribution, when it comes to product testing, when it comes to efficacy, right? And that's really, I think, the game changer is Canada allows them a platform to be able to research this, on a federally legal basis, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So clients that come to me are like, let's talk about bioavailability as it relates to CBD, because no one's having that conversation. Let's talk about efficacy. When we say fast acting, it's not just because 10 people that smoked this saw that it was fast acting.
Right.
Like let's survey like 200 people and see if it actually increases sort of how quickly things hit them. So those are the kinds of things that these industries are bringing to us and to Canada first, right?
Yeah.
So it's great to be able to see that.
Yeah, it's kind of nice to see that it's almost the incubator for the world of cannabis. Yeah, I've never really looked at it like that either. Okay, governments. Sometimes I'm like, what are we going to peel back here? Obviously, there's some shifts happening in Germany. Which governments or countries get you really excited right now?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think that it's the newer countries. I get a lot of calls in this last 2 months that I've been doing some visits in Asia, and whether it be, India, Thailand, Sri Lanka, the list, Bhutan, the list is endless of countries that are looking at legalizing this. And those are the countries that get me excited because for them, there's a lot of R&D and research that happens in Southeast Asia on pharmaceuticals. And there's a big population base there, right?
Yeah.
That can really benefit from medical cannabis or even cannabis as a wellness product. So that's what really gets me excited is sort of that shift to these big population centers that so far have been opposed to cannabis, but now are starting to actually open up. Those are the ones that truly, Tom, get me excited.
Are they opening? I'll just say it because of the tax grab. Are they opening it because they truly want to service their population and the individuals? What's the reasoning behind it? Because again, some of them have been very vocal for decades, if not centuries. Cannabis is bad.
Yeah.
It's so bad, right? And now look at Canada, look at Germany, look at Australia, look what they're doing. Tax grab. Where do you see it? And I'm assuming that they're all different, but
yeah, they're all different, but I think to a large extent, I think they see the wellness and the medical aspect of things. In Asia in particular, there's a lot of issues around sleep. There's a lot of issues around anxiety, depression. Those sorts of conditions are really sort of increasing in those countries, and I think they look at cannabis as being an option for their population base. And again, they want to be able to do the clinical trials. They want to be able to do the research. And there's a lot for them to contribute because they have done that for pharmaceuticals. If you look at where majority of the world's pharmaceuticals are manufactured, it's done in India, where a lot of the trials are done. A lot of the research and the development, the true drug development formulation is being done in those countries. So, they bring something as an add-on, right? Which cannabis has really been missing so far. I mean, GW has done some of it. There's a few companies in North America and Europe that have done this, but there's a lot of that capability that lies in Asia that is ready to turn on. So yeah, revenues are certainly an aspect and definitely a factor in this. I'm not going to discount that, but I think then the value add that they can add in addition to just revenues is really what's exciting them.
Yeah. And it's funny because we take cues from Cali and Canada, especially in the BC days, it's, flower first. And I think that with these countries or regions coming online, it's not always flower first. It's not going to be pre-rolls necessarily. It's okay. We're going to look at this as a true medical treatment or option similar to a pharmaceutical. Will they avoid flower in some cases?
Yes. I think they will. And if you look at France, it's a classical example of that, right? I think they are now rolling
France
out
is
their
smoking, the smokers of, not just Canada. I mean, cigarettes even like
Yeah. But they're rolling out their program, and flour currently is eliminated from it,
Mm,
right? And they want to try and develop this truly as a pharmaceutical product. They're not looking at recreational again; they're looking this truly from a medical lens. And again, I think that the companies that are the countries that look at this from a true pharmaceutical dosage form perspective recognize inherently, and I'm not saying that people don't benefit from flour as a medical cannabis formulation. Definitely, there's an aspect of that, but I think countries generally feel like, they want to move forward in other dosage forms
mhm.
and give that a priority. So France, as an example, is not including flour. And I think you will see countries, including some in Asia, that move away from flour and actually start with extracts to begin with.
Yeah,
And there is a population base that understands that. I think that the stigma, particularly in Asia, around flour doesn't help. It doesn't help the medical conversation due to that stigma. And it's
right.
easier to get around the stigma by starting with a true pharmaceutical dosage form like a capsule or a tablet.
Hmm, hmm. What about Japan? Where's Japan gonna? Are they gonna ever come online?
Well, it's interesting, right? They recently have started to come online. They
Yeah, there's
are,
discussions, right? I
starting with
haven't seen.
CBD,
Yeah.
right? But the problem with those countries is the stigma again is so inherent that they want very low THC. I mean, these countries look at THC as being this completely negative thing, which we know, and anecdotally, we know that there needs to be that THC component and
Hmm.
the entourage effect to have
Yes.
true medical and wellness benefits, right? I think that Japan, unfortunately, is moving away from that. They've got very, very low limited detection on THC, but are starting with CBD. Right now, you've
Hmm.
got CBD products that are available. A company that's partnered up with Coca-Cola is doing a beverage with CBD in Japan.
Wow.
So, they're opening up. I mean, all of these guys will come at it differently and with different cannabinoids,
Hmm,
which I
hmm.
think is actually quite exciting because it allows CBD and CBG to have its day as much as
Yeah.
THC has had in the West.
That's wild. That's wild. Is there any country that, I mean, top of my head, I could probably name a few, but ones that are just never going to get there? There's no way they're ever coming up with cannabis legalization.
Yeah, I think that the Middle East, I think Russia, I think those are countries that are very,
Russia could
very
use some.
staunchly opposed. Yeah, all of them could use some. In fact, those countries could use more than some of the other ones. 100%.
Yeah. But when you just need to go smoke a joint, dude, just chill
That's it.
out, man.
That's it.
Yeah, yeah. And obviously the Middle East, we know. Yeah.
Well, Singapore, right? I mean, Singapore still jails people for the tiniest possession of cannabis. They have penalties where, people are beaten for cannabis. It's
Yeah.
crazy, right?
Yeah.
Like, so yeah, would love to see those countries change, but I think it's going to take a while before they fully switch over.
Mhm. Where's the largest opportunity right now? Because Germany's always been a great hotbed for Canadians, especially with export. Telemedicine throws a wrench into their plans a little bit. And why? Do you have any insight as to like why is the incoming German government so up in arms about telemedicine and prescriptions or in Canada? Man, I had to flip flop so many times. Prescriptions, recommendations, right? But what?
Authorizations.
Yeah,
Yeah.
authorizations. What else can we call it? But why? Why? Like, what are they against? What? Like, I don't get it.
Yeah, look, I mean, Tom, so I mean, in Germany, that the previous government that basically quote unquote legalized cannabis, or in my case, at least decriminalized and allowed medical cannabis to really flourish, uh, really did so without setting a lot of guardrails, right? Post COVID, there was this opening up of telemedicine, which again, all good things.
Mhm.
But I think what the new government, which is not the government that came up with this law, now sees is, imports going through the roof, telemedicine going through the roof, and certainly with that, some shady actors that have deployed physicians that never see a patient or
Mm.
barely even talk to a patient. And Europe has weird laws where a patient in Germany could see someone sitting in Romania, Bulgaria for very cheap. Chances are doctor doesn't even speak German or English and is now basically prescribing this product for a patient that he hasn't seen or has done very little
Mm.
background on, right? So I
Okay.
think it really jeopardizes the whole system.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
think what
yeah.
Germany is doing is just fixing sort of those bad actors, right?
Mhm.
And I don't think that this rollback of telemedicine that a lot of people predict is effectively going to happen. I think it's going to be just improving and bettering sort of the existing framework so that true patients that want to be able to access cannabis for medical purposes have a a avenue, right? I think the
Yeah.
industry also has not done itself any favors by not self-regulating and not getting ahead of this and saying, all right, let's, instead of the government telling us what we should be doing, let's create the perfect system so that we have guardrails around who can
Right.
and cannot access cannabis, right? I think
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
is the challenge is, companies have looked at, well, what's the government going to do? And the government's done nothing. And chances are sometimes when the government starts to do something, it's the heavy hand comes down, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's what you're seeing a bit in Germany. This whole unrolling, going back to a narcotic, I don't think is going to happen. I also think it's going to take a very long time for anything to be changed in Germany, probably a year and a half. So you are still going to see a telemedicine program. It just is likely going to look different. And if
Hmm.
you look at Poland, which is a country that recently completely rolled back its kind of medical cannabis through the online prescribing piece, you had people set up physical clinics. They saw over the year where are most patients coming from. Let's set up a physical location in that site. And sure enough, you're now starting to see prescriptions from those physical locations actually bump up.
Mm.
So end of telemedicine isn't necessarily the end of the cannabis industry, if you will, right?
Yeah.
People
Yeah.
will find other ways to be able to provide patients with access to the product, whether it be the medical wellness or eventual recreational, as we talked about.
Interesting. Interesting. I never really looked at it like that. That makes a lot of sense though. It reminds me early days though, 2016, 17, getting your prescription is telemedicine. Yeah, we're just it's a quick 20-minute call. That 20-minute call was about a minute and a half.
Yeah.
Yeah. You having trouble sleeping? Yes, approved.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Huge influx. Okay, and then so we covered Germany. There was one that I wanted to Italy. Where are we at with Italy? What's going on? I still remember 2018. I think I was there. I was in Rome and I'm like, oh, wow, look at all the flashy dispensaries. These look great. And then I go in and they're like, this is all CBD. I'm like, say what?
Yeah.
Say what? And that was my first experience, right? Because I was so hyper focused on what was going on in Canada. I didn't
Yes.
have your perspective of what's going on worldwide. But anyways, any shifting? What's going on now?
Yeah, it's not helpful when you see a cannabis flag or a cannabis sign, and then cannabis in our world is
Yeah.
both THC and CBD. It's not
Yeah.
necessarily just CBD, right?
That's right.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, look, Italy is one that has recently changed. It's kind of the way that they're going about it. So initially, the army was the one that was only cultivating
Yeah.
cannabis, and it was the only one that was allowed to grow it there. And you had a few tenders that were put out. Aurora had won one of the tenders early on, but didn't really deliver products into market. But now what you're seeing 2025 is this shift, right? I think they're going the opposite direction on CBD because they've again seen so much proliferation of Delta 8 products and all the stuff you see in the US is happening in a big extent in Italy, where you've got HHC and all these other cannabinoids that are coming out the back door. And so you've seen the government really crack down, unfortunately, in my opinion, even on true CBD products.
Right.
So you've seen a reversal on that. But on THC, you are now seeing, pharmacies start to import product. Again, I think Tilray recently, just last week, signed an agreement with a pharmaceutical distributor in Italy. So you are seeing more mainstream pharma companies actually start to come on board, which is a positive sign. I think you are seeing Canadian companies that have EUGMP certification, being able to service the true medical and pharmaceutical needs of a country like Italy. So lots happening there. And again, even Poland, right? It's something we haven't talked about, but a lot of companies from Canada really focused on the Polish market.
Yeah, let's focus on that for a little bit because I was close to that when I was working with Trust. And I mean, Mike was out of Ireland, but still Polish, and spent a lot of his time there. And I'm like, you guys have such a weird market, like it's right. And I think it's it's been about a year now, but I haven't been really paying too much attention to what's going on. You touched on it a bit, but what is going on in Poland now?
Yeah, so I mean, Poland, really interesting market. Patient numbers are growing quite significantly. But the challenge with Poland is there's very few products that are actually approved, and it's because the Polish government has a very long product registration window. So if you're a company that wants to actually get your products into Poland, you're waiting 9 to 12 months to actually get registered with the Polish government, because you need to go through a traditional dossier. It's a true pharmaceutical product form. It's, you need to have a lot of robust data that comes along with that. So you're seeing a very big market on the one hand, serviced by a very handful of players, right? So
Hmm.
if I looked at Aurora's numbers recently from their financials, and they're wholesaling to sort of the wholesalers product in Poland for €9 a gram, €9 a
What?
gram, wholesale, right? And it's
Jeez.
going to patients for about €14 a gram. So there is a significant opportunity there for companies that can get around that product registration, right? Which is
Yeah.
very chunky, a lot of GMP, a lot of stability, a lot of things they're asking you for. But if you can get around that, it's this really sort of beneficial from a margins perspective, but also very big market to be able
Hmm.
to serve. So, it's one that many companies are paying very close attention to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Curaleaf's already in there. Obviously, Canopy's in there. Tilray's in there. There's a few others that are now in there, but a really interesting market, and
Hmm.
one that I think is a bit underserved and a bit underwatched,
Yeah.
given all the noise in Germany and the UK.
What happens when the market? So obviously, I have to break this down a little bit. So we have a smaller market outside of Canada. Maybe pretty much purely import. That's probably easier to control when it comes to saturation of products and there's not enough moving. But for ones that are both importing, potentially exporting, um, how do they control the licensing or that flow of product to make sure that the market does not become saturated?
Yeah, so I think that, typically as with anything in demand and supply, like typically kind of market kind of dictates itself, right? So you're not going to see this US style Big Brother approach
So now you
where,
know, yeah,
you're
that's
going to
where I was
see a
going.
shutting
Yeah.
down of licenses. I look at Canada as an example, right? Everyone was like, well, when is Health Canada going to shut down licensing? That's not how Health Canada works. It's
Mm,
typically not how the rest of the world works, right? I think Health Canada's approach has always been the market will dictate when people have enough licenses, and
yeah.
we're not responsible for people going bankrupt. That's a business decision that companies need to make.
Hmm.
Should we get into the industry? Do we feel like we have an opportunity? We, as the federal government, are no one to dictate to the industry what they should or should not do. Maybe somebody's got a great idea for a beverage product that no one's launched so far, and the federal government shouldn't stop them. So I think
Hmm.
that's the inherent approach for government. So I don't think you'll see licensing start to stop or restriction on market control. I think market forces will dictate that.
Yeah.
Having said that, I think, Tom, you bring up a good point. I think that price compression, oversaturation, all the stuff we saw in Canada is starting to appear its head in sophisticated markets now, like Germany and the
Yeah.
UK. And so I think they would be wise to look at what's happened here. Through my travels and through my interactions, what I do see is new countries that come along and mature often forget and make the same mistakes that we've made in Canada, right? And I think they'd be wise to learn about margin compression, price compression,
Yes.
oversupply
Yes.
from Canada. And then you add a lens of GMP. The downside of GMP is when you launch a product, you will have a shelf life
Hmm.
allocated to the product. So
Right.
the product actually expires, right? When you say it expires.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, it's not like Canada where you've had product that's 4 years old and you still technically can sell.
Yeah.
You actually can't technically sell it because it's
Right.
expired in the year. So you will start to see that happen, unfortunately, in markets like Germany, where people that may have stocked up an inventory now will be forced to do a fire sale because it's expiring in
Hmm.
6 to 8 months.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and that is where I was going with it. But you're right. I mean, free market opportunity, pizza shops.
Yeah, exactly.
Someone's got on that. No, I'm doing it different though. Oh, are you? Okay, you go ahead and open that pizza shop, buddy. No problem.
Yeah,
But damn, that's good pizza.
yeah,
Right? But at some point, you're just stealing customers, clients from others, anyways, because again, you have the saturation point. But it's interesting, GMP, and that's what some forget. There's an expiry date. There's an
that's it.
expiry date. Like we don't see that. What 95% of the products in Canada, they don't need to
Yeah.
have it. Okay. And then Israel, where are we at? Well, what's going on?
Lots going on. So I mean, look, with unfortunately with the war and everything that has happened there's been
Yes.
a number of challenges. A lot of people still accessing cannabis for PTSD. Unfortunately, you've seen the government recently come out with these weird anti-dumping allegations
Hmm.
on Canada, which at the end of it didn't go anywhere, fortunately. But nonetheless, there was this whole witch hunt in the midst of this war, to accusing companies of price dumping, which really wasn't rooted in any facts, because I think their thesis was, you're selling product to Israel for lower than you're selling to the Ontario, cannabis store, which is not correct, right? I think they were looking at retail prices that the OCS was charging and saying, how can Israel buy it for cheaper than that? Well, obviously, right? They failed to factor in that the government is taking a 60% margin on this,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So of course, if they could sell to the government, they wouldn't be selling to Israel, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
so I think the price numbers were completely flawed. They were looking at that price to consumer in Canada and being like, how come they're pricing it cheaper? Well, it doesn't really make sense, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's what happened. But nonetheless, you have seen a bit of shift as a result. You saw some LPs hedging their bets. I mean, Kronos still is selling in a big way to Israel, but
Mm-hmm.
really the market has shrunk a bit there. Give you a number of reasons. There's a lot of domestic supply now on. There are other countries that are still selling into Israel, but nonetheless, Canada still continues to be the biggest exporter or the importer into Israel of medical cannabis. But a bit of a weak market in terms of market growth due to a number of
Yeah.
different factors
Yeah.
that have happened there.
So Deepak, walk me through. I don't know if we've ever had this because you're kind of you're like you've touched so many facets of the industry. You've well traveled. You've interacted with countless people. Like I always forget, and I don't know why I forgot this. Is that if there's something I need to know, why don't I just reach out to you? Like seriously, I need a connection. I need something, and obviously that goes both ways. Although
Of
I think
course.
everyone I know, you probably already know. But outside of that, what is your core service offering? Because people, they understand you, they understand the industry globally, but what is your core service offering outside of, yeah, I can connect you with someone, I can do this. What does that look like?
Yeah, so I'd say, at its core, Tom, it's really three or four things. I think it's, government relations, it's business development, and it's strategic market entry, right? I think those are sort of my core offerings. So
Hmm.
if you're a company that's looking to either, I get this a lot, is Canadian companies looking to get into Germany or get into Poland or get into the UK or Australia, that's something that I can do very effectively, right? That's
Hmm.
one. The second is really, like I said, the government relations piece is, now a big push is how do we educate the federal government or the provincial government that we're cannabis producers and they need to understand what we're doing, right? So just to be able to provide them data and insights saying, hey, we are 70% of German imports, we are 80% of UK imports, right? So things of that nature. I think
Hmm.
those are the kinds of services that I offer, and of course connecting the dots just comes naturally where I do have a fairly big global network where I am able to connect people. But I'd say those are really some of my three kind of core offerings.
Hmm. So you talk about let's say I'm a Canadian cannabis, LP. I still use LP. I think we switched
Yeah.
to LH at some point, but I go, Deepak, I want to bring you on, returning your services. I want to go to Germany. First question, what are you going to ask me?
Why? It's just
Because I'm
why,
sure,
right?
sorry.
Why? Like, why do you want to go? Like,
Yeah,
honestly, it's a
thank
bit
you.
like back in the day, a lot of people wanted GMP, and
Yeah,
my first question would be like, why?
yeah.
Because the fact of the matter, Tom, is there's like what 900 licenses, like
Hmm.
800 and some of that don't actually need GMP and shouldn't get GMP, right?
Right.
So it's a bit like, why do you want to go to Germany, the market that's price compressed, where there's margin compression coming in, there's saturation, there's
Yeah.
oversupply? Those are some of the first questions is, why is it that you want to enter? And, gone are the days where you'd see some astronomically high price per gram. That's not happening.
Hmm.
There's a few isolated markets, the UK, that does pay that super high price, but we're not in that category where you're getting double, triple what the domestic market would give you wholesale, right? We're not
Yeah.
there. That ship sailed.
Yeah.
So, it's the real question is why? Do you have a unique product offering? Do you have some great cultivars? What makes you different and what makes you interested in the international market, right? And I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
that's the first part of the conversation. So if people can get through that gate, then it's like, okay, well, then let's go on to the
Hmm.
next ones.
How often do you hear, because it's just really good flour, I need to get it there. I need, right? I'm sure you've heard that a million times.
Oh, yeah,
It's the same pitch as the OCS get, right? You
that's
need to
it.
bring us in. It's fire. It's just
Yeah.
fire. It's like I connected. The reason I say that, my respect and love for OCS is growing daily.
Yeah.
I connected with Trevor Dayton last week, and I'm like, wow, like why are more retailers and brands not listening and taking your advice? You guys are in
Yeah.
the midst of it. You
That's it.
hear it all, you see it all, you have the data, but also you're the gatekeeper. Like,
Yeah.
why not play friendly with you?
Yeah.
But okay, so I've got great product, I'm not gonna like, discount that. I want to move it somewhere. Do you help with that as well? So I'm sitting on X, or does the international market become dependent on consistency of supply? Or is it
That's it.
can it be one-off bulk product? Like, I don't know.
Sometimes, Tom, and I mean, there's different avenues, right? It may not be direct into international. There may be companies that are looking to buy the product. So it really depends on case to case. But you're absolutely right, Tom. I think, people are looking for a consistent product, right?
Hmm.
Coupled by the fact that, every market, I think this is what the biggest misconception out there as it relates to international cannabis is like, I'm going to get my GACP and then I'm going to be able to sell anywhere in the world, right?
Hmm.
Wrong. Like, you're not going to be able to sell. Like, Germany is the complete opposite from the UK. Yes, it's a quality requirement. Yes, you need some basics, but like you get into things like microbials. Germany, by effect, basically doesn't prioritize irradiated product, right? You
Right.
have to wait 9 months if you're going to get your product irradiated. So suddenly, if you're growing outdoor or you're growing, in greenhouse and your microbials are super high, you're not going to be able to sell to Germany, right?
Mm.
Whereas the UK and Australia, you need to irradiate, so you can sell into that market, right? So there's a lot of various nuances on every market where it's not a one size fits all approach.
Mm.
People really need to start understanding, what is their product? Why is it fit for the market? And if someone comes to me and says, hey, I've got a great indoor product that meets super low micros and I'd like to get into Germany, I can do, 100 kilos or 200 kilo lots every month. That's the kind of person that's like, all right, I think it makes sense for you to
Yeah,
look at
yeah.
international, right? Where if it's
Interesting.
someone that's growing outdoor and they're like, hey, we don't, we've got excess biomass, you're not going to make it to Germany, unfortunately. You'll probably get into another market, but not
Yeah.
Germany.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was on last week with a company. I won't say too much yet because it's still in development, but they're, obviously irradiation, e-beaming, all the different opportunities. Like Rad Source, I've had Rad Source on before. They've come up with it's a bio opportunity instead of irradiation. What markets? So Germany's no, can't be, but has to sit shelf stable, basically, I think, right?
Yeah.
Other markets are only irradiated. Where do you sit on that? Do you care at the end of the day?
Yeah, look, I mean, Tom, it's all about sort of, meeting the regulations and the compliance. Yes, I do care because, at the end of the day, you want to get a compliant product into market. So,
Mhm.
and there's various ways, right? Just because I said no irradiation doesn't mean there's no other remediation options,
Right,
right? There
right.
could be
Very different.
remediations, not
Yes,
irradiation, right? So there's
yes.
just so many levels and layers that you need to peel back and understand that. So, do I care? Yes. I mean, I care with respect to quality, right? And I
Hmm.
think that our definition in Canada of quality is very different from the international market's definition of quality. What we mean by quality is got a great potency, big nug, super high terps, really fire looking product. Yes, that matters. But if I can't get that product and it's not compliant from a microbial it's not able to be remediated and
Hmm.
you don't have stability, it's not a quality product. A
Yeah,
quality product is something that has all of those attributes, ideally in addition to everything that we talked about, right? So the definition of quality from an international standpoint is vastly different to our domestic
yeah,
definition.
yeah. Who's got the most stringent? So my final question for you, because and then who has the most stringent market to enter based on that quality factor? And again, so bag appeal, nose, yeah, 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 yeah. But the microbials, is there anyone that's more stringent than Canada?
Yeah, I'd say Germany is
They are,
very,
right?
very
Okay.
stringent, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there are ways to get around it. I don't want this to sound like it's impossible to get into, but it's probably one of the most stringent regulatory countries where they look at everything from GMP to, compliance to all of that, right? But each country has, as I said, its own quirks. The UK is equally as stringent because they're now coming down on GMP. They're coming down on marketing in a big way, right? So
Mm.
I'd say that Germany and the UK probably are one of the more challenging countries to get into. But if you're in cannabis, you're in compliance, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
hand in
Yeah,
hand. If
they
you're
go hand in hand.
they
Yeah.
go hand in
So
hand.
I mean, you mentioned marketing. Okay. I still see the biggest hill to battle on, at least climb and battle on, is marketing.
Yeah.
I'm not saying open it up. That's not, even with my marketing background and studying of it, like I'm not saying open it up, but at least loosen a little bit. What country do you see with the biggest opportunity when it comes to that, because I still view marketing as a form of education. And
Yeah.
when we can't educate, it's partially the reason that we have these weird people. I see it all the time. Bud tenders posting about this and that. I can't believe I was asked this. Well, that's
Hmm.
why marketing is important. We need to be able to
Yes.
educate. So, but when it comes to different countries or regions, who's doing it right when it comes to allowing marketing?
So I'd say Germany, if you look at what's happening in Germany right now, like I went to the recreational kind of conference, which is Mary Jane.
Hmm.
Absolutely blown away, Tom, by the sheer number of people. I mean, 50, 60,000 people per day just coming in
Jeez.
to that place. And like, they've got a culture, right? And they've got some big brands now. You've got obviously Cookies and Tyson and a lot of the American, Californian brands, Sluggers, etc., showing up. But like, I think they have gotten it right so far, right? They haven't heavily restricted marketing on these products. And so you are starting to see a real culture starting to take shape, right? And I think that, again, they've shown that the world necessarily hasn't ended, right? We don't need to strictly look at this from a public safety lens, which Canada has, I think, in my opinion, overdone, right?
Hmm.
Is that, what about the kids? And, God save the
Yeah, yeah,
kids. And
yeah,
then, still the black market can, or the legacy market can still service, products and put
yeah.
Skittles and other kind of products onto shelves. So I think Germany's done it the right way so far. I think the UK is now looking at Canada and following them. Most recently, a couple of brands had to rename their products just because it was taken in a too recreational sense. So
Hmm.
Germany, I think, is actually is open right now from a marketing standpoint and is really wanting those brands. I think you're starting to see partnerships with hip hop artists and other
Wow.
kind of celebrities and influencers really take shape in Germany. And I think that's the one from a marketing perspective
Very
that is
cool.
so far doing it well and doing it right.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think there's a point of over regulating and just loosening it just enough. I'm not saying that we need to have celebrity endorsement. We've seen what's happened right in Canada with
That's
Drake
it.
and Seth
Snoop
Rogen
Dogg
and
and
yeah,
Martha
Snoop
Stewart.
Dogg and
Yeah,
and Snoop Dogg still had a staying power though. I mean, under dogs or what's it, pounds, dog pounds now I
Health
think is
Bounce, yeah,
still present. But again, it's most people at the consumer level don't necessarily understand that it's not the same cannabis. It's
that's
different
it.
in that country. Even in the US, it's different state to state to state, let alone
That's
different
it.
products here in Canada. Okay. I want to work with Deepak. What ducks do I need to get in a row before I approach just to help? I know that you'd be like, no, you just send me an email, give me a call. But in order to help move that conversation along a little bit more so you can help them, what ducks in a row do I need to have to get?
Yeah, I'd say just at a minimum, just having some basic COAs, having the basic understanding of like, international markets. Often people say we need GACP. No, you don't need GACP certification. Yes, great if you have that, but just a basic understanding and some COAs of, to be able to start the conversation.
Hmm.
Because without COAs and without some historical background on things like microbials and potency, it gets a bit hard to have a serious discussion. So I'd say starting off with COAs is probably the most relevant,
Which you should have.
which you should have.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised how many people come to
Deepak,
me
I
and they're
got a
like,
trunk
yeah,
full of weed.
yeah,
Yeah, can I see your COAs? What's that?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Or
But
like, yeah, we've got domestic stuff, from XYZ lab that
yeah, yeah.
isn't relevant internationally, right? That's the
Right.
challenge that I run into most of the time.
Yeah. Well, listen, my friend, it's been a pleasure catching up and you sharing all your knowledge. Let's do it again because I love just connecting with you. Let's make sure that we continue this.
Likewise, Tom, let's keep in touch and thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Anytime, my friend. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.